What is going on, Governors? Chisgule here, and today we're going to do a commander guide for Attila, who looks like a beast for hitting garrisons. If you like Rise of the Kingdoms videos where we evaluate commanders, you should like and subscribe, because we've evaluated just about every single commander that has hit the game, and we are a sponsored creator with Rise of Kingdoms. As you know, when we do a commander guide, we look at the skills, the talents, we get a look at how you unlock the commander, and then my favorite part, how you pair them up with different commanders. Today we're going to go a little bit deeper in the skills and talk about the intricacies of how some of them work based on our own testing. So let's get a look at the first skill, King of the Huns. This is the active skill. Requires rage to go off, and it's 1000 rage in this case. For the next 4 seconds, increase normal attack damage and counterattack damage by 30%. And normal attacks have a 50% chance to reduce enemy attack by 50% for 2 seconds. This effect can only trigger once every 2 seconds. The thing that I'll call out about this is the 50% attack reduction is honestly a pretty huge reduction in attack. I think it's one of the biggest reductions in attack we've seen in any commander in the game, which is pretty amazing. Let's go into the next skill, Siege of Constantinople. When attacking garrisons, increase all damage dealt by an upwards of 10% at max, and has a 10% chance every turn to reduce the garrison's defense by 25% for 3 seconds. Now, this is pretty solid. Reducing the defense of the target means everybody hitting it is going to do more damage. 10% chance to have that proc. So if you're doing normal attacks on the enemy, then, 1 in 10 turns, you're going to have this go off. So 3 out of every 10 turns, their defense will be reduced by 25%. Pretty solid. I'm now shooting from the hip a little bit, but it's something like 8 or, yeah, it's almost like an 8% debuff all the time, if you think about it that way. That's not actually how it works. It's going to be procced and then down for some amount of time, but overall, a solid effect. Looking at the next skill. I don't know how to pronounce that. We'll keep going. Skill damage against troops led by Attila is reduced by an upwards of 15%, and his own troops is also reduced by 30%. So you do a lot less skill damage, which means you don't want to have active skills that do a lot of damage. You want your damage primarily to come from normal attacks in a perfect world, but at least you are taking less skill damage as well. And increase cavalry units' march speed and attack by 15% for the march speed and 40% for the attack. Those stats are amazing. That is a huge number of stats just to compare to another commander, right? Like, this is just giving you 40% infantry health. So we can see why for this skill, you're getting march speed and 40% of cavalry attack, but it comes at a downside. You're taking 15% less skill damage, and you deal 30% less skill damage. So there's some big downside there. Let's keep going. By the way, you're going to want to find ways to reduce the effect to which that's a downside. We'll talk about that in a bit. Battle of the Catalonian Plains. When the army, led by Attila, has only cavalry, which is of course the situation you're going to create with this commander, normal attacks have a chance to increase their own troops' attack damage for the next 2 turns, and it's a 25% chance for 50% extra damage, and there's a 25% chance for 100% extra damage, which is really good. Now, I wondered, is there an internal cooldown on this effect? Is there an internal cooldown on this effect? So I went and I battled some barbarians, and I was able to create this report where in the very start of the battle, the Battle of the Catalonian Plains triggered. That was that 4th skill. On the next turn, it's active. For me, it was a 30% damage boost. And the next turn, it was still active for a 30% damage boost. However, it triggered again while the skill was still active. So it can trigger while it's already active, which is really strong. The attack triggered Battle of the Catalonian Plains, and this time it was the 60%, the higher tier of damage boost. That would normally be 100% if you had this skill maxed. So there is no internal cooldown on this skill, which is what makes it really quite good, and it's basically got a 50% chance that you're getting extra damage for 2 turns, and that chance to trigger is on every normal attack. So that is actually quite strong. It elevates, I believe, counterattack, normal attack, and also your skill attacks, which is really, really powerful. That's a very strong effect that we're looking at here on the 4th skill of Attila. So let's get a look now at the expertise skill, the Scourge of God. That's a pretty bold claim. The troops led by Attila are immune to silence effects. This very much counters Wu's Etienne, and he is a garrison-hitting commander. So this is a commander that is very likely to be countering Wu. And in addition, against enemy troops with less than 50% strength, increased damage dealt by 20%. This is another effect that's very good against garrisons. The way that a garrison works is the health of the garrison is basically the health of the primary army, the army that's captaining the defense. That army will fall below 50% very early in the fight and will stay that way for the remainder of the fight below 50%. So this will be active for a large part of the battle. And one micro optimization you could do to counter Attila is to actually swap who your captain is so that you have a nearly full army as the captain as much as possible. It seems like a lot of work, but if you've got some redundancy and who can offer those garrison captains and the tech is the same and the gear is the same, might actually be worth it if you're getting rallied by Attila. But there is more to this expertise skill, which you can only unlock by completing all the other skills maxed out, 5, 5, 5, 5. Increase march speed by 50% for 3 seconds after leaving battle. 50% is a huge boost in march speed. You are going to get places when you leave battle. It's possible this commander could be used to carry flags in Ark of Osiris. That could be a thing. I mean, they take less skill damage, which is pretty good. Some tankiness on cavalry is kind of unusual. They do have march speed. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. 15% march speed is a lot for cavalry. That is already a very fast march, going even faster. Now, what gets really kind of interesting is if we look at the talents, because I think there's a couple routes you could go for builds, but generally one route I would recommend. The build I would use for Attila would be to get all of the talents on the way to Rallying Cry, and then I would make my way over to Effortless, and then I would also make my way over to Martial Mastery. That is the build I would use. You get like 1 extra point with that, which I drop into Undying Fury. With that said, there's some questions here. How good really is this 15% extra damage at the start of the fight? I don't know how amazing that might be. If you don't think your army is going to be swarmed, you can instead get Fight to the Death, elevating your damage dealt by 6%, but also your damage taken by 3%. As long as you're not getting swarmed, then I think that's an okay trade-off. The other route you could go, and some people seem to like this, although I've never been a huge fan, is to get Buckler Shield, which reduces the counterattack damage taken. That's the counterattack damage you take when you hit an enemy. That only works for the enemy you're actively attacking. Maybe that's better than making it out to be, but I don't think so. You could go all the way to here to get some march speed, but I'm just very unexcited about that. So if I were building out this commander, and I was leveling him up, and I had intended him to be the primary commander, which is debatable. I'm still not sure. We have to test to figure out like what actually is optimal. I would probably start by making my way over to Effortless. I would then head on up and get Emblazoned Shield. From there, I probably would make my way to Rallying Cry, and last but not least, Martial Mastery, increasing your normal attack damage, decreasing your skill attack damage. If we can find pairings of commanders where you're not doing skill attacks, then that's all upside. Speaking of which, let's talk about how you actually unlock this commander. This commander is only available in the Mighty Governor. From there, you've got to use your Universal Sculptures, which is a pretty major investment. This commander is a pretty major investment. Who should be investing in this commander? People who are very, very excited about cavalry might consider investing in this commander. Also, your rally leaders probably should consider investing in this commander. We've got to do the testing to figure out just how good they are. Now, when you're skilling up Attila, the thing you're going to want to do is max the first skill. This is pretty much always the case with a legendary, except your gathering commanders. But then, because the second skill is all about hitting garrisons, I would take this commander up to 4 stars, unlock the 3rd and 4th skill, and hope that your points end up there instead of in this one over here. This does count for hitting structures in Ark of Osiris, so if you are swarming those structures, you would want your points to end up there eventually, but I think that the 3rd skill and the 4th skill are far more important and general. Simply unlocking this one is good enough. Move past it and hope your skills land other places. And it's worth mentioning that for this next portion where we talk about pairings, we wanted to get a guide out, but we still have testing to do to figure out what the best pairings really are. Let's start by talking about some pairings that you might have expected or might not have expected, and we'll even review some epic commanders as well. The first pairing we're going to look at the legendary tier is Cao Cao. Cao Cao is a mobility commander, and the way I like them as a pairing with Attila is actually as the secondary commander. Use the build that I recommended for Attila as the primary, and I know that it's going to reduce the skill damage from Dragon Rider. However, the expertise skill here is increasing cavalry attack by 25%, which is going to increase your normal attack damage, which is something that your Attila cares about a whole heck of a lot. There is rage gen here, which is really crucial. Attila doesn't have that. There's some sustain in the healing from this skill, and there is some additional march speed and attack, which I really, really like on Cao Cao. Overall, I think a solid pairing. The only anti-synergy might be the attack reduction. Pretty sure that 40% attack reduction from Cao Cao is not going to stack with the 50% attack reduction that you're going to get from Attila. Another obvious consideration would be Minamoto. Minamoto does have a high amount of skill damage, which makes him in many ways a not optimal pairing, but if you did use Minamoto as the primary, rocking a build like I have here, I actually do think that the rage generation is very, very strong for Attila. He wants his active skill to fire more frequently, but doesn't have any ways to generate rage. For that reason, I think a commander with the skill tree could be kind of interesting, but know that you're really not going to get a benefit from some of these talents, which require the secondary commander to have active skill damage. Continuing onward, Kahn is an obvious consideration and is better than meets the eye. Now, even though you are reducing the skill damage dealt by Kahn, which is unfortunate, I do think that the elevated damage from the 4th skill on Attila randomly, well, not randomly, there's a 25% you boost your damage by 50%, 25% chance you're boosting it by 100%. I actually think that makes up a little bit for the damage loss that you're having, and I love that Kahn is going to make these skills machine gun out, which is really impressive. I mean, can you imagine a normal attack triggers the 4th skill on Attila, and boom, now you have 100% extra damage, and then you get a double strike from Chosen One, where it does the 1700 damage, and then boom, it strikes again, 1700 damage, but you have the 100% damage boost. I don't know. It could be good. We're going to have to test with it. The other thing worth mentioning here is that this increases the 4th skill on Kahn, increases your active skill damage by 30%. Well, that's not going to matter for your Attila, so there's some amount of perhaps anti-synergy here between these two commanders. Your slam dunk choice, in my opinion, is actually going to be a Saladin primary with Attila secondary. And while you will be reducing the skill damage of your Saladin, this is going to be an army that takes like no skill damage at all, because the talents and the skills are reducing the skill damage you take profoundly. The rage engine on Saladin coming from the rejuvenate talent is going to be absolutely through the roof, which means you're going to have a high uptime on Attila's first skill, which is really very strong. That's the thing that I think Attila would really benefit from. So I think that actually is a very, very strong pairing and is going to be the very first thing that I play around with if I go for the expertise skill on Attila. I like Saladin as a rally leader due to all that anti-swarm technology in the form of that skill damage taken reduction. Very, very, very powerful. Now, as we look a little bit deeper into the roster of legendary commanders you could pair with, there's a few here that you might not have expected. For instance, you could do a Freddy primary using the skill tree. I think this is just okay. I probably wouldn't recommend this. However, there is a leadership commander I would recommend considering, which is Julius Caesar. Now, Julius Caesar doesn't have any skill damage. He does elevate your attack and defense and damage, which seems really quite strong. He does add tankiness to this army, which is quite strong. You're bringing more troops, so you will do more normal attack damage, and you do get, okay, a little bit of skill damage thrown in here, which is not the worst, an extra 400 damage factor whenever a skill fires off. I think it's pretty good as a consideration with either Julius as the primary, or I probably would prefer to see Attila as the primary in this configuration. It looks like an interesting pairing, and I'm pretty eager to see how that would pair out. I suppose you'll get more benefit from this first skill if Caesar is the primary, but you'd have to play around with the damage and see what that looks like to determine if it is Caesar or Attila that should be the primary. Now, in terms of other legendary commanders that you might consider, there is one other that is important to talk about. That is Takeda. Takeda is the other cavalry legendary commander that is not doing active skill damage. I think Takeda could be good, but I am in general unimpressed with the amount of extra damage you're getting by boosting your normal attack damage. This could be totally gangbuster. I don't know yet. I don't have Takeda. I can't test it. Hopefully he'll show up in a wheel event soon and I can test it, which I very much look forward to doing when he's available to me. But in the meantime, I would say these two commanders were probably meant to be used together, and I will be very eager to see that pairing play out. It could be a very strong counter to Wu, who really is optimized around taking skill damage and reducing the effectiveness of that, and they do know skill damage. So we'll see how that plays out. At the epic tier, you've got some of your usual contenders that you might pair with Attila. That includes Pelagius as a primary, love that choice, or as a secondary. The Rage Generation's amazing. I love it. I love this commander. Another consideration you could use is like Boudica, but I mean, like, I don't know, that's reaching pretty deep into the roster. You could use a commander like Baibars, but he cares a lot about skill damage. I think the unlikely but interesting picks here would be a commander like Scipio. Scipio doesn't care at all about skill damage. So all the things that like are reducing your skill damage dealt, you're not going to care with a Scipio as the secondary, and I think that could be a pretty interesting pairing. Another commander that you might not have considered, but I think would actually be pretty good is Belisarius. Belisarius would be the secondary commander in this case, and I really like that he doesn't do all that much damage factor, so you're not missing doing, you know, the 30% extra damage factor that will be dealt here because he's not doing that high of a damage factor anyways. This could be an interesting pairing. Last but not least, at the epic tier, I'm just saying, Joan of Arc primary. This is like Saladin Jr., okay? Saladin Jr. is your Joan of Arc primary. Could be really, really good. You'd be machine gunning out the skills from your Attila, which I think is great. You're going to have a pretty tanky unit because these talents make it so that you're not taking as much skill damage. You're not taking as much skill damage over here, which I think is really quite strong. I like what's happening here. I like what's happening here a whole heck of a lot. Using your Joan of Arc as a primary, I think could actually be quite strong with an Attila secondary. So my friends, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Who do you plan to pair Attila with? If you're using him at all. I'm on the fence on how great this commander will be. We're still not going all in because he's available in Mighty Governor. So we're going to wait until we've had a few more Mighty Governor cycles. Maybe we'll get a few more sculptures of him before we decide whether or not we're going to go all in on investing in this commander. In the meantime, we've got like those 940 sculptures. We're looking maybe at Edward might be a likely investment in the not too distant future. That could be kind of an interesting one. To be determined, my friends. To be determined. If you enjoyed this video, again, like and subscribe would mean a lot to me as a content creator. And until next time, you have fun smashing the kingdom.